Chapter 18 Neural Control and Coordination. As you know, the function of the organ system in our body must be coordinated to maintain homeostasis. Coordination is the process through which two or more organs interact and complement the function of one another. For example, when we do physical exercise, the energy demand is increased for maintaining an increased muscular activity. The supply of oxygen is also increased. The increased supply of oxygen necessitates an increase in the rate of respiration, heartbeat, and increased blood flow via blood vessels. When physical exercise is stopped, the activities of nerve, lung, heart, and kidney gradually return to their normal condition. Thus, the function of muscle, lung, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and other organs are coordinated while performing physical exercises. Understood? In our body, the neural system and the endocrine system jointly coordinate. Neural system and endocrine system jointly coordinate and integrate all the activities of the organs so that they function in a synchronized fashion. The neural system provides an organized network of point-to-point connection for a quick coordination. The endocrine system provides chemical integration through hormones. In this chapter, you will learn about the neural system of human, mechanism of neural coordination like transmission of nerve impulse conduction across a synapse. So we are going to start with the neural system. The neural system of all animals is composed of highly specialized cells called neurons, which can detect, receive, and transmit different kinds of stimuli. The neural organization is very simple in lower invertebrates. For example, in Hydra, it is composed of a network of neurons. The neural system is better organized in insects, where a brain is present along with a number of ganglia and neural tissues. The vertebrates have a more developed neural system. Next is human neural system. The human neural system is divided into two parts: the central neural system and the peripheral neural system, CNS and PNS. The central neural system includes the brain and the spinal cord and is the site of information processing and control. The PNS comprises of all the nerves of the body associated with the CNS, that is brain and spinal cord associated with CNS. The nerve fiber of the PNS are of two types, afferent fibers and efferent fibers. PNS की दो टाइप की होती है, afferent और efferent. Understood? So let's wait for a minute. I have to drink water. So let's start. The afferent nerve fiber transmit impulse from the tissue organ to the CNS, and the efferent fiber transmit regulatory impulses from the CNS to the concerned peripheral tissue organs. CNS से लेके जाएगी उसे कहेंगे efferent, EFFERENT, और जो लेके आएगी उसे कहेंगे afferent. ठीक है? The PNS is divided into two divisions called somatic neural system and autonomic neural system. The somatic neural system relays impulse from the CNS to the skeletal muscle. The somatic neural system relays impulse from CNS to the skeletal system. The somatic neural system relays impulses from the CNS to the skeletal system, while the autonomic neural system transmit impulse from the CNS to the involuntary organs and smooth muscles of the body. Somatic neural system CNS से skeletal system, while the autonomic neural system transmit करता है CNS से involuntary organs से and smooth muscles of the body. The autonomic neural system is further classified into sympathetic neural system and parasympathetic neural system. Visceral nervous system is the part of the peripheral nervous system that comprises the whole complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia and plexus, by which impulses travel from the central nervous system to the viscera and from the viscera to the central nervous system. Visceral nervous system is a part of the peripheral nervous system that comprises the whole complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia and plexus, by which impulse travels from the central nervous system to the viscera and from the viscera to the central nervous system. Next is neuron as a structural and functional unit of neural system. ठीक है, न्यूरॉन और नेफ्रॉन में अंतर होता है. ठीक है. A neuron is a microscopic structure composed of three major parts, namely cell body, dendrite and axon. कौन कौन से मेन पार्ट होते हैं बताओ? सेल बॉडी, डेंड्राइट एंड एक्सॉन. धीरे इसलिए पढ़ा है ताकि माइंड में उतर जाए. ठीक है. सेल बॉडी, डेंड्राइट एंड एक्सॉन. द सेल बॉडी कंटेन्स साइटोप्लाज्म विच typical cell organelle and certain granule bodies called Nisal granules. The cell body contains cytoplasm with typical cell organelles and certain granular bodies called Nisal granules. Short fiber which branch repeatedly and project out of the cell body also contain Nisal granules and are called dendrites. Short fibers which branch repeatedly and project out of the cell body also contain Nisal granules and are called dendrites. These fibers transmit impulses towards the cell body. These fibers transmit impulses towards the cell body. The axon is a long fiber, the distal end of which is branched. The axon is a long fiber, the distal end of which is branched. Each branch terminates as a bulb-like structure called synaptic knob, which possesses synaptic vesicles containing chemicals called neurotransmitters. The axon transmits nerve impulse away from the cell body to a synapse or to a neuromuscular junction. away ले जाता है. ठीक है. Based on the number of axon and dendrites, the neurons are divided into three types, that is multipolar with one axon and two or more dendrites found in the cerebral cortex. क्वेश्चन आते हैं यहाँ से. मल्टीपोलर कहाँ पे हो? with one axon and two or more dendrite found in the cerebral cortex. Bipolar with one axon and one dendrite found in the retina of eye, and unipolar cell body with one axon only. यहाँ पे कंफ्यूज करने के लिए वन एक्सॉन कर देगा, ओनली वन एक्सॉन, ओनली वन डेंड्राइट, वन एक्सॉन एंड वन डेंड्राइट, बट करेक्ट है यूनिपोलर कंसिस्ट ऑफ सेल बॉडी विथ वन एक्सॉन ओनली, फाउंड यूजुअली इन द एम्ब्रियोनिक स्टेज. ठीक है. There are two types of axons, namely myelinated and non-myelinated. The myelinated nerve fibers are enveloped with Schwann cells, which forms a myelin sheath around the axon. The gaps between two adjacent myelin sheaths are called knots of Ranvier. Myelinated nerve fibers are found in spinal and cranial nerves. Myelinated nerve fibers are found in spinal and cranial nerves. वाह भाई. The unmyelinated nerve fiber is enclosed by a Schwann cell. This does not form myelin sheath around the axon. ठीक है. Myelinated nerve fiber are enveloped with Schwann cell which form myelin sheath around the axon. और unmyelinated nerve fiber is enclosed by a Schwann cell तो होते हैं but does not form a myelin sheath around the axon and is commonly found in autonomous and the somatic neural system. Unmyelinated नर्व फाइबर कहाँ होती है? ऑटोनोमिक एंड सोमेटिक न्यूरल सिस्टम। और माइलिनेटेड कहाँ होती है? स्पाइनल एंड क्रेनियल नर्व्स में। ठीक है, क्लियर। नेक्स्ट इज जनरेशन एंड कंडक्शन ऑफ नर्व इम्पल्स। Neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in a polarized state. Do you know why the membranes of a neuron is polarized? Do you know why the membrane of a neuron is polarized? पता है? मैं बताऊँ? A neuron's membrane is polarized because of an electrical difference across the membrane. This happens when a neuron is at rest, meaning it's not sending or receiving signals. ठीक है, different type of ion channels are present on the neural membrane. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ion. When a neuron is not conducting any impulse that is resting, the axonomal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions and nearly impermeable to sodium ions. ठीक है, जब रेस्टिंग में है तो एक्सोनल मेम्ब्रेन है परमिएबल करेगी पोटेशियम आयन को, मीन्स के पॉजिटिव को कूड़िया को अंदर आने देगी, बट इम्परमिएबल टू सोडियम आयंस। सिमिलरली द मेम्ब्रेन इज इम्परमिएबल टू नेगेटिवली चार्ज्ड आयन present in the exoplasm. Consequently, the exoplasm inside the axon contains high concentration of potassium. अंदर किसका ज़्यादा कंसंट्रेशन होता है? K प्लस का। And negatively charged proteins and low concentration of sodium is present inside. ठीक है, एक्सॉन के इनसाइड। ठीक है, in contrast the fluid outside the axon contains a low concentration of potassium, a high concentration of sodium. बाहर क्या होगा? एक्सॉन के कंटेन लो कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ कुड़िया कम होगी और हाई कंसंट्रेशन ऑफ Na होगा, एंड thus forms a concentration gradient. Clear? Thus, ionic gradients across the resting membrane are maintained by the active transport of ions by the sodium-potassium pump, which transport 3 Na outward for 2 K into the cell. 3 sodium outward for 2 potassium into the cell. As a result, the outer surface of the axonal membrane possesses a positive charge. कितने? 3 Na आउट करेगा फॉर 2K into the cell. As a result, the outer surface of the axonal membrane possesses a positive charge, while its inner surface is become negatively charged and therefore is polarized. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called as the resting potential. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called a resting potential. You might be curious to know about the mechanism of generation of nerve impulse and its conduction along an axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site in a figure, point A on the polarized membrane, the membrane at the site A becomes freely permeable to sodium. This leads to a rapid influx of sodium, followed by the reversal of the polarity at the site. That is, the outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and the inner side becomes positively charged. The polarity of the membrane at the site A is thus reversed and hence depolarized. The electrical potential difference across the plasma membrane at the site A is called the action potential, which is in fact termed as a nerve impulse. At the sites immediately ahead the axon, example site B, membrane has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on the inner surface. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to A to complete the circuit of current flow. Hence, the polarity at the site is reversed and an action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse action potential generated at site A arrives at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently the impulse is conducted. The rise in the stimulus induced permeability to sodium is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by a rise in permeability of potassium. Within a fraction of a second, potassium diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation, and the fiber becomes once more responsive to further stimulation. वैसे यहाँ से इतना इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं है, क्वेश्चन नहीं आते इसलिए मैंने जल्दी पढ़ दिया, ठीक है। आया भी तो देख लेना इलस्ट्रेशन के थ्रू, ठीक है। नेक्स्ट इज ट्रांसमिशन ऑफ इम्पल्सेस. A nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another through junctions called synapses. A synapse is formed by the membrane of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. There are two types of synapses, namely electrical synapses and chemical synapses. At electrical synapses, the membrane of pre- and postsynaptic neurons are in very close proximity. Electrical current can flow directly from one neuron into the other across these synapses. At electrical synapse, the membrane of pre- and postsynaptic neuron are in very close proximity. Electrical current can flow directly from one neuron into the other across these synapses. Transmission of an impulse across the electrical synapse is very similar to the impulse conduction along a single axon. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. ये लाइन आई थी PYQ में, ठीक है। Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. Electrical synapses are rare in our body, ठीक है। At a chemical synapse, the membrane of the pre- and the postsynaptic neurons are separated by a fluid-filled space called synaptic cleft. Do you know how the presynaptic neuron transmit an impulse, that is action potential, across the synaptic cleft to the postsynaptic neuron? Chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of the impulses at these synapses. Chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of the impulse at these synapses. The axon terminals contain vesicles filled with these neurotransmitters. When an impulse, that is action potential, arrives at the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of the synaptic vesicle towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitter in the synaptic cleft. Understood? डायग्राम दिया हुआ है यहाँ पे, ठीक है। सिनेप्स क्या क्या होता है? प्री सिनेप्टिक न्यूरो मेम्ब्रेन और पोस्ट सिनेप्टिक के बीच में सिनेप्टिक क्लेफ्ट मिलकर बनाता है एक सिनेप्स. When an impulse arrives at the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of the synaptic vesicle towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. The released neurotransmitters bind to their specific receptors present on the postsynaptic membrane. This binding opens ion channels, allowing the entry of ions which can generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. This binding opens ion channels, allowing the entry of ion which can generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. The new potential developed may be either excitatory or inhibitory. Next is central neural system, CNS. The brain is the central information processing organ of our body and acts as the command and control system. It controls the voluntary movement, balance of the body, functioning of vital involuntary organs, that is lungs, heart kidney, etc. Thermoregulation, hunger and thirst, and circadian, that is 24-hour rhythms of our body, activities of several endocrine glands and human behavior. Function वापस से बता रहा हूँ, it control the voluntary movement, balance of body, functioning of vital involuntary organ like lung, heart, kidney, etc. Thermoregulation, hunger and thirst, circadian, 24 hours rhythm of our body, activities of several endocrine glands and human behavior. Understood? It is also the site for processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotions and thoughts. It is also the site for processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotion and thoughts. The human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by the cranial meninges, consisting of an outer layer called the durameter, a very thin middle layer called the arachnoid, and an inner layer which is in contact with the brain tissue called pyometer. Outer dura, middle arachnoid, inner pyometer, which is in contact with the brain tissue. कौन है? Pyometer. The brain can be divided into three major parts: forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. ठीक है? Understood? Hindbrain में क्या क्या आता है? Pons, cerebellum and medulla. Forebrain में hypothalamus, hypothalamus और cerebrum. डायग्राम में दिया हुआ वो बता रहा हूँ. ठीक है? So next, that is forebrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus and hypothalamus. क्या क्या? Cerebrum, thalamus and hypothalamus. Cerebrum forms the major part of the human brain. Major part कौन बनाता है? Cerebrum. A deep cleft divides the cerebrum longitudinally into two halves, which are termed as the left and right cerebral hemisphere. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called cerebral cortex and is thrown into prominent folds. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the grey matter. Cerebral cortex is referred to as the grey matter due to its greyish appearance. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas and a large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. Take a neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas and large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. These regions, called as the association areas, are responsible for complex function like intersensory associations, memory and communication. Association areas are responsible for complex functions like intersensory association, memory and communication. Fibers of the tract are covered with the myelin sheath, which constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. They give an opaque white appearance to the layer and hence is called the white matter. The cerebrum wraps around a structure called thalamus. Which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. कौन है major coordinating center for sensory and motor signal के लिए? कौन है? थैलामस, ठीक है, थैलामस, थाला फॉर रीजन. Another very important part of the brain called hypothalamus lies at the base of the thalamus. Base of thalamus के नीचे क्या करता है? hypothalamus lie करता है, जो कि important part है. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which control body temperature, urge for eating and drinking. It also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells which secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones. The inner part of cerebral hemisphere and a group of associated deep structure like amygdala, hippocampus, etc. form a complex structure called the limbic lobe or limbic system. The inner part of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of associated deep structure like amygdala, hippocampus, etc. form a complex structure called limbic lobe or limbic system. कौन मिलकर बनाते हैं? amygdala और hippocampus. Along with the hypothalamus, it is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior. In the sexual behavior, expression of emotional reactions, that is, example, excitement, pleasure, rage, and fear, and motivation. Emotions, reaction, example, excitement, pleasure, rage, and fear, and motivation. Rage का मीन्स क्या होता है पता है? मतलब गुस्सा, ठीक है, क्रोध. Next is midbrain. The midbrain is located between the thalamus, hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. किसके बीच में लोकेटेड होता है? थैलामस, हाइपोथैलामस ऑफ द फोरब्रेन एंड पॉन्स ऑफ द हिंडब्रेन. थैलामस और हाइपोथैलामस फोरब्रेन के और पॉन्स ऑफ द हिंडब्रेन के बीच में सिचुएटेड है मिडब्रेन. ए कैनाल कॉल्ड द सेरेब्रल एक्विडक्ट passes through the midbrain. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of 4 round swellings, lobes called corpora quadrigemina. Understood? आ गया समझ में? ठीक है, चलो आगे बढ़ते हैं. Let's proceed further. मतलब इसको एक बार रिपीट कर देते हैं. ठीक है. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of 4 round swellings, lobes called corpora quadrigemina. Corpora quadrigemina. ठीक है. Dorsal portion of the midbrain consists mainly of 4 round swellings, lobes called corpora quadrigemina. ठीक है. I hope अब तो घुस गया होगा दिमाग में. ठीक है. Next is hindbrain. The hindbrain comprises pons, cerebellum and medulla, also called as the medulla oblongata. hindbrain में क्या क्या आते हैं? pons, cerebellum जिसको बालम कह सकते हैं, ठीक है, and medulla, also called the medulla oblongata. Pons consist of fiber tract that interconnect different lines of the brain. Cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. Cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. The medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. किसके साथ कनेक्टेड होगा? मेडुला स्पाइनल कॉर्ड के साथ. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretion. The medulla contains center which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. ठीक है, तो लेट्स प्रोसीड फर्दर. ठीक है. 3 major lines make up the brain stem: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata, which you can remember by BMMP, bump. ठीक है. ब्रेन स्टेम कौन कौन मिलके बनाते हैं? मिड ब्रेन, पोन्स एंड मेडुला ऑब्लोंगेटा, BMMP, मिड ब्रेन, मेडुला ऑब्लोंगेटा, पोन्स। ठीक है, मिड ब्रेन, पोन्स एंड मेडुला ऑब्लोंगेटा। Brain stems forms the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. Brain stem forms the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. Brain और spinal cord के बीच में connection कौन बनाता है? Brain stem. So thus we are going to read the summary. ठीक है? The neural system coordinates and integrates function as well as metabolic and homeostatic activities of all the organs. Neurons, the functional unit of neural system, are excitable cells due to differential concentration gradient of ions across the membrane. The electrical potential difference across the resting neural membrane is called resting potential. The nerve impulse is conducted along the axon membrane in the form of a wave of depolarization and repolarization. A synapse is formed by the membrane of presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by a gap called synaptic cleft. Chemicals involved in the transmission of the impulse at chemical synapse are called neurotransmitters. Human neural system consists of two parts: CNS, central neural system, and PNS, peripheral neural system. The CNS consists of brain and the spinal cord. The brain can be divided into three major parts: forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The cerebrum is longitudinally divided into two halves that are connected by the corpus callosum. किससे connected होते हैं halves? Corpus callosum से. A very important part of the forebrain called the hypothalamus control the body temperature, eating and drinking, inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere, and a group of associated deep structure, inner part of the cerebral hemisphere, and a group of associated deep structures forms a complex structure called limbic system, which is concerned with the olfaction, autonomic response, regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reaction and motivation. ठीक है? Inner part of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of associated deep structure form a complex structure called limbic system, which is concerned with olfaction, autonomic responses, regulation of sexual behavior, expression of emotional reaction and motivation. The midbrain receives and integrates visual, tactile and auditory inputs. मिड ब्रेन रिसीव करता है और इंटीग्रेट करता है विजुअल, टैक्टाइल एंड ऑडिटरी इनपुट्स को. ठीक है. द हिंड ब्रेन कंप्राइजेस पॉन्स, cerebellum and medulla. Pons, cerebellum and medulla. The cerebellum integrates information received from the semicircular canals of the ear and the auditory system. The cerebellum integrates information received from the semicircular canals of the ear and the auditory system. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes and gastric secretion. Medulla contain centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes and gastric secretions. Pons consist of fiber tract that interconnect different lines of the brain. Pons consist of fiber tracts that interconnect different lines of the brain. With this, we completed the chapter. Thank you for hearing. आया समझ में?